All right, our second example here. Make sure you get this written down. We have 3 plus 5q equals 2q squared minus 4 plus 2q. Our quadratic formula, I wrote it out here again for you. This time notice it says q equals because we have q's, but the formula is the same, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Remember that step number 1 is we need our equation in standard form. If we look this time, it is not in standard form. We don't have it set equal to 0. We don't have it in the right order. So you can go about this a couple of ways. In several of your examples, you probably moved everything from the right side over to the left, which is fine. But there are already 3 terms on the right side, and there's only 2 on the left side. So it would actually be easier to move these 2 terms over to this side. So I'm going to subtract 3 since it's positive and with its like term of that negative 4. In the same part, I can subtract 5q and subtract it with its like term of 2q. So that eliminates both of those, giving you 0. I have 2q squared. Negative 4 minus 3 is negative 7. And then 2q minus 5q is negative 3q. But if we look, this is still not standard form because we're not in the right order. Some of you might be able to just from here identify A, B, and C pretty easily. It is not A, B, and C in this equation. Okay, some of you though, I would highly recommend you finish converting this into the correct form. So we have 0 equals, we want the 2q squared first. Then this negative 3q should be our next term, or minus 3q. And then minus 7. And now it should be relatively easy for you to be able to tell me A equals 2, B equals negative 3, and C equals negative 7. Pay attention to those plus and minus signs again. Okay? So if you were back up here in this equation and you wanted to identify A, B, and C, you should still have the same A, B, and C numbers. A, B, and C are not based on the place in the equation. It is based on what variable it is in front of. So A has to be in front of the x squared, or in our case, q squared term. So no matter where it's located, it has to be the q squared. Same thing with B, it has to be in front of q. So it's not that it's the second number in the equation, it's the number in front of q, which for us is negative 3. Okay, so just make sure you're paying attention to that information. Now we need to fill into our quadratic formula. I'll get it rewritten again. So we have q equals negative, and then our b value is negative 3, plus or minus the square root of our b value, which needs to go in parentheses squared, minus 4 times a is 2, times c is negative 7. The whole thing gets divided by 2 times our a value of 2. So everything just went in its place. Negative of our b value, plus or minus the square root of our b value squared, minus 4 times our a value times our c value. The whole thing gets divided by 2 times our a value. In the next step, remember there are 3 things you can do all at once. You can simplify negative b. So we have negative 3. 2 negatives make a positive. Plus or minus the square root. Your next thing you can do is type what's underneath the square root into Desmos or into your calculator to see what that number is. So when we come back here to Desmos, move this so we can see it. We have in parentheses our b value that gets squared, minus 4 times our a value times our c value, which we get is 65. So underneath our square root, we're going to have the square root of 65, all divided by, and the last thing you can simplify is your denominator. 2 times 2 is 4. Your next step should be to simplify your square root, in our case, square root of 65. We come back into Desmos and type the square root of 65. Remember, we need to round everything to hundredths place, which is 2 decimals. So after our 2 decimals, we have a 2. which means it should not change it. So the square root of 65 is 8.06. So we have Q equals 3 plus or minus 8.06, all divided by 4. So we just took the square root of 65 to get 8.06. Now, because of your plus or minus sign, you can split it up into your two different possible answers, one where you have a plus and one where you have a minus. So 3 plus, oops, that should be 8.06. Let me fix that. 3 plus 8.06, all divided by 4. And 3 minus 8.06, all divided by 4. And then you can go to Desmos and type those in. Remember to put your numerator in parentheses so that we get 3 plus 8.06 all divided by 4 is 2.77 because it's 5 rounds it up. So our first answer we have is 2.77. And then you just need to go back to Desmos and change your plus sign into a minus sign in your numerator. So instead we're going to have 3 minus 8.06 and then all divided by 4. Remember, hundredths place, we've got this 5 rounds it up. So negative 1.27 is your other answer. There are your two answers. And remember that you can go back, and you should go back and check your answers on Desmos. So we're going to come back up here to the very original equation. Before we did any moving, we can type this in. Now, when you start typing it in, with your Q's, you would notice that this little symbol comes up. It's not happy with Q's. So we need to use X's instead. So we're going to do 3 plus 5x equals 2x squared minus 4 plus 2x. I just changed all those Q's to X's in Desmos. And then we're going to come back so we can see our answers and make sure our answers match. So we had 2.77 and negative 1.27. If I round that up, that's negative 1.27. And if I look at this one, same thing. If I round it up, that is 2.77. So our answers are correct. We're going to go through one more example together, and then hopefully by that time you are good and able to continue on your own. Remember that if you are having any issues after you go through this example with me, you aren't sure about something or you get stuck, please make sure you are emailing me, sending me a message on Remind, or if you're able to attend our video chats from 11 to noon. All right, so 2p squared minus 1 plus 4p equals 1 minus 3p squared minus 5p. Now in this one, as we notice, we're not in standard form. We have 3 terms over here and 3 terms over here on both sides, so it doesn't matter which one you want to move to which side. So just because I know a lot of you like to move things over to the left side, we can do that. So we're going to subtract the 1 and subtract it from its like term. We should add 3p squared to its like term, and we should add 5p to its like term. The 1 is positive, so subtract. The 3 is negative, so add. And the 5 is negative, so add. So 2p squared plus 3p squared should give you 5p squared. Negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. It is not 0. Negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. And then 4p plus 5p is 9p equals 1 minus 1 is 0. Negative 3p squared plus 3p squared is 0. And negative 5p plus 5p is 0. Gives you 0. At this point, you are not officially in standard form because you are not in the right order. If you are able to identify A, B, and C from here, then that is great. You may try and do so. But otherwise, we should move this around. We want our p squared term first, then the p term, and then your constant. So we just need to flip these two terms, make your minus 2 at the very end, and make your plus 9p in the middle. So now our quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So if we look at our equation, a is the number in front of p squared, which for us is 5. B is the number in front of P, which is 9, and C is the constant, which is -2. If you were back up here, you should have still gotten the same things. Now you should be able to plug those into your quadratic formula. So we have P equals negative, and then our B value is 9, plus or minus the square root. Put your B value inside parentheses and then square it, so 9 in parentheses squared, minus 4 times your A value times your C value, all divided by 2 times your A value. Now back up here, I'm using parentheses, but in these two places, it's not necessary. You could just do 4 and then a times sign 5 and then a times sign -2. Either option works here. In this one, you need to make sure you are using parentheses because you're going to square it, okay? Now, next step, remember there are 3 things you could do at once. Simplify -b, so -9 is -9, plus or minus the square root. Next thing you're going to do is simplify everything under here. So we're going to go back to Desmos, clear out what we have. Don't type your square root in, but type in exactly what you have underneath. So that negative, or that positive 9, sorry, needs to go in a set of parentheses, square, minus 4 times A times C. So 9 squared minus 4 times 5 times -2 is 121. No rounding to have to do in that case. And then you can also simplify your denominator. 2 times 5 is 10. Now we can actually take the square root of that 121. So we keep 9 plus or minus the square root of 121 is 11. Continuing with no decimals in this problem. Now you're going to take your answers and split them up into their 2 different parts. One time you're going to have adding and one time you are going to have subtracting. So P equals -9 plus 11 divided by 10. And P equals -9 minus 11, all divided by 10. Going back to Desmos, you can type your numerator, -9 plus 11 in a set of parentheses, divided by 10. You get 0.2. So your first answer is P equals 0.2, no rounding because that is already left with less than a hundredth place. And then just go back to Desmos and change that plus sign into a minus sign. -9 minus 11 in parentheses divided by 10 gives you -2. Once again, no rounding. There are our 2 answers, positive 0.2 and -2. We should go back up to the top and check with Desmos. So remember, we're going to have to change these P's into X's. So I had 2x squared minus 1 plus 4x equals 1 minus 3x squared minus 5x. And you can look at where they cross. We have -2 and positive 0.2. And if we come back to our answers, that's the same thing. We had -2 and positive 0.2. So at this point, we've gone through a couple of examples together. Hopefully you feel pretty comfortable going through and trying some on your own. I would recommend that you rewatch these if you need to. Remember to send me a message, an email, or remind if you need help with anything. If you get stuck, make sure you're taking a picture and sending me your work so I can see what you've got so far. Also, attend video chats during the hours of 11 to noon if you have questions.